Who actually discovered America? You know, it's a question that sounds so simple, right? But the answer is honestly one of the most complex, hotly debated, and monumental stories in all of human history. For centuries, we've all been handed this beautifully polished myth, a lone, heroic captain bravely sailing out into the vast unknown, only to stumble upon an empty, waiting continent. But history is rarely ever that clean. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a story of absolute desperation, apocalyptic collisions, and a truth that is far more gripping than the legends we were taught in school.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the age of exploration, the myth, the reality, and the voyage that changed humanity. Let's jump right in.
Now, to really understand why anyone would risk sailing off the literal edge of the map, you have to put yourself in the shoes of 1400s Europe. Picture this. Absolute desperation. The traditional overland trade routes connecting Europe to Asia had completely collapsed. Silks and spices from the east were in incredibly high demand, but they were nearly impossible to get. And this sparked a high-stakes, cut-through global race. Whoever could find a new, cheaper path to Asia wouldn't just become wealthy, they would effectively rule the world.
Because those overland routes through the Middle East were blocked, European monarchs were left with just one terrifying alternative: the sea. And we have to remember, the Atlantic Ocean back then wasn't just uncharted territory. People genuinely considered it a deadly, impossible abyss. There'd be monsters, right? Yet, the promise of unimaginable wealth pushed entire nations to the absolute brink, kicking off this unprecedented era of exploration.
But you can't just sail into an abyss blindly. They desperately needed a massive technological leap. And the irony here is just fascinating. The very tools that made European discovery possible, they actually came from entirely different cultures. They heavily relied on the magnetic compass, which was adopted from the Arab world, alongside this absolutely incredible piece of ancient Greek engineering, the astrolabe. This ancient Greek device was adopted by European explorers to find latitude and navigate these completely unmapped oceans. It was this specific combination of shared global knowledge, ancient mathematics, new maps, and updated ship designs that finally gave sailors the courage to step off the edge of the known world.
And that brings us to the year 1492. An Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus pitches this wildly daring plan: reach Asia by sailing straight west. He actually gets rejected by Portugal, England, and France before finally securing funding from a war-torn Spain that was just desperate for wealth. So he sets sail on his flagship, the Santa Maria. It was a slow, heavy ship heading directly into an ocean that absolutely terrified his crew. The psychological tension, the fear of starvation, the actual whispers of mutiny, the utter uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed so heavily on every single man aboard.
After weeks of absolute terror, they finally spot land. Columbus and his men believed they had stumbled upon this pristine, untouched frontier. But was it truly an empty new world? Because right here is exactly where the myth completely shatters.
The reality, the Americas were anything but empty. Thousands and thousands of years before Columbus ever set foot there, humans had migrated across the Beringia land bridge. They had developed incredibly advanced, culturally rich civilizations. We're talking about the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, the Mississippian, the Toltec, Olmec, and Teotihuacan. These were sprawling, highly engineered societies with complex agriculture, towering pyramids, deep astronomical knowledge, and populations literally numbering in the tens of millions. The idea of an empty continent is just a total fabrication.
And honestly, even from a strictly European perspective, Columbus wasn't actually the first. Way back in the 10th century, literally hundreds of years before the Santa Maria was even built, the Norse explorer Leif Erikson led groups from Iceland and established a presence in North America. The Old World and the New World had actually already touched.
Because of all this, modern historians look at Columbus's legacy through a deeply fractured lens. On one side, you have the traditional narrative we all know, the great explorer and discoverer, a visionary who bridged two halves of the globe. But on the exact opposite side, heavily documented historical texts reveal a much darker reality of a tyrant, a looter, and a murderer. Records show that upon meeting the generous indigenous people of Hispaniola, the colonizers immediately took advantage. Their manic pursuit of wealth led directly to brutal violence, mass enslavement, and the systemic annihilation of thousand-year-old cultures. To truly grasp the sheer scale of this tragedy, listen to this quote from historian David E. Stannard regarding Hispaniola.
What happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. I really want you to let the weight of that sink in. Records indicate that in just 21 years, nearly 8 million people on that single island were wiped out by violence, disease, and absolute despair. It wasn't just a conquest, it was an apocalyptic collapse.
The Columbian Exchange, a collision that changed the world.
This devastating contact initiated a permanent, irreversible biological and cultural collision between two hemispheres that had been completely separated for millennia. But as history shows us, this global exchange was incredibly unequal. Europe received immense wealth, gold, new foods like potatoes and corn, and ultimately global trade dominance. And the Americas? Well, they received violent colonization and devastating foreign diseases to which they had zero immunity alongside horses and new technologies. Europe grew rich and powerful, while indigenous populations faced utter catastrophe.
So, 1492 wasn't just a simple discovery, it was the permanent reshaping of human destiny. I mean, think about it. New crops completely altered global diets forever. The mad rush for colonies literally birthed modern mercantilism, an economic system where nations fiercely compete for wealth through trade monopolies and hoarding resources. The catastrophic demographic collapse in the Americas fundamentally changed the cultural landscape of half the planet. How we trade, what we eat, the very languages we speak today, it all stems directly from the bloody, fascinating collision of these two completely separate worlds.
Which leaves all of us with a really profound, lingering question, one that actually still divides the world today. Did the age of exploration ultimately benefit the world, or did it cause more problems than it solved? Did the resulting global connection and technological leap forward justify the unimaginable human cost, the loss of ancient civilizations, and centuries of suffering? It's a complex reality, guys, far beyond simple heroes and villains. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking the hard questions.